Good evening everyone, and welcome to the second AvGeeks live editing stream, and this is the first one on our YouTube channel. Hopefully you should have the option to view it in 1080p 60 frames a second. So if you have a look, if you are allowed to, it's great. If not, let me know and I'll try and fix it. Good evening everyone, and welcome to the second AvGeeks live editing stream, and this is the first one. How are we all this evening? Good evening, Mr. Fogarty. Are you well? Just give it a few more minutes to get some people in. Excellent, 1080p, yay! So some of you have watched us on Facebook before. The reason moving away from Facebook and onto YouTube is so that we can get it to 1080p. Some of the previous ones, people have said they can't actually read what I'm doing, so I thought, well, let's try and push it up, and YouTube is the best way of doing that. So if you haven't already, like and subscribe. If we can get to 100 subscribers, we can actually give it an official name rather than just a youtube.com/bunch of numbers. I'll tell you what, we'll crack straight into it. So as some of you may have noticed from our AvGeeks posts and various different Instagram stories that last week before last, I think, week before last, we took a group trip up to the Mach Loop. There was 9 of us went, so it was a good old laugh, and we were blessed with some really lucky visitors from the US Air Force, the RAF. So what I thought I'd do is I'd go through some of my favourites from that week, just kind of edit them on here for you all, and just sort of give you a flavour of how I edit, and also get to have a look at some of the stuff that we took. And you'll probably see proof that not every image is perfect. Obviously, what we post on Instagram is our final image, and sometimes we have to do a fair amount of work to some of it. So hopefully, I'll show you through some of that as we go along. My plan is to maybe spend an hour, just over an hour, with you guys, and I'll sort of cover off my work stream. And if there's anything you guys want to see or look at, just give me a shout, and I'll try and help you out. So let's crack into it. So this shot was from our first day out there. This was when we went up to Cad West, and we were greeted by some fairly low cloud when we got there. But as the day improved, the RAF came out to play and sent through a fair amount of Texans, some Hawks, and we did get a Strix flight from RAF Mildenhall, which I've got some shots of later on. But let's start with this Texan, because this is we got several Texans through the day, so I've got quite a few pictures of Texans. So what I'm going to do with this one, I'll give you actually a background on what I was shooting with. I was shooting with a Nikon D7200 crop sensor camera, and I was using my Nikon 200-500 f5.6 lens for all of these shots actually. And yeah, so let's get into it. If you want any questions about my gear, let me know, and I'm more than happy to talk about it. So what I'm going to do with this one is, first off, I'm going to correct the lens profile. So that would give it a nice bit of that will just sort out any kind of warping of the lens that gets taken in. It just straightens it out, fixes it, that sort of thing. Now I'm looking at this shot. Obviously it's a nice catch. The only issue I've got with it is that it's right in the bottom corner, and I like to have a bit more space around my aeroplanes. I'm not usually a fan of a tight crop, but what I will do is, in this instance, we'll give it a tight crop and see how it looks. Now, it looks alright with a tight crop, but I'm not so convinced about the bottom. It feels too close to the bottom of the page for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reset that. And what I think I might be able to do with this is extend the frame. There's a lot of repeating patterns in the grass behind it, so that's something Photoshop might be able to help us out with. So what we'll do is we'll export it into Photoshop. This is one of my favourite little tricks, recomposing in Photoshop. Right, so what we're going to do, I think we're all right at the back, the top and the front. I just want to add a bit at the bottom, partly because of, obviously, as I say, I like a bit of space, and if I'm going to post this on Instagram, I don't want my watermark going over the top of the aeroplane. So what we're going to do is we're going to extend our canvas. We're going to do it in inches because it doesn't really matter, because I'm probably going to trim it down afterwards. And we're going to add probably an extra, go with 4 inches on this one. And then what this will do, this will create an extension of the canvas. And then what we can do with this is we can select that white area of the canvas and use the content aware fill tool, and that will assess the background and replace the bottom with something that matches. And as you can see, because there's quite a few repeating patterns, it will do a fairly good job of it. Sometimes you'll find that it's quite rough, especially when you've got a busy background, but with this one where you've got quite a lot of repeating patterns, it's all blurred out anyway. You see there, it's done a fairly decent job of creating a repeating pattern across the landscape. There's a little bit here that I'm not entirely convinced about. This area here looks like it's not done a very good job, so what I'm just going to do, there we are, that looks much better. Now this is something that you could spend a long time working this out. I'm just going to do this really fast and dirty, to be honest. Now I know it does look like there's quite a lot of copying going on down here, but what I am going to do is I'm going to crop it in to give us the original format. So we'll probably lose some of that. As you can see, I've got a little bit more at the bottom that I can work with. And then what we're going to do is we're going to check the image size and bring it back to how the size it is in Lightroom, and then we're going to save that back. It's a clever little trick. It's relatively easy. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It works best on blue skies, if I'm honest, because blue skies are relatively easy to deal with. So there we are. We've got our completely fresh crop to work with. So what we'll do is we'll just give it a little bit of a tweak in. And there we are. And as some of you have known before, I like to give my planes a little bit of space around it, because I like to see that they've come from somewhere and they're going to somewhere. That's one of my personal quirks. I'm just not a huge fan of tight crops. So what we're going to do, I was shooting in auto ISO in this one, so it's a little bit noisy in places, but we can fix that. So from where we are here, to me it feels a little bit overexposed, so I'm going to bring that down just a little bit. We'll probably play around with this as we go. It's a little bit washed out. I'm going to give it just a bit more, just a bit of contrast. I'm losing the plane's looking quite sort of pasty. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a masking tool to sort of work on the airplane itself, rather than doing global edits to everything that will affect the background as well. As you know, that masking tool has done quite a good job of catching that. What I do like to do when I've got a prop plane is I like to leave the propeller out of the mask. I like that to just sort of work with what the background's doing. because I feel it feels a bit more natural, because you can find you get some janky edges when you do this masking, but if you take the prop out, it just feels like it gives it a better, because it blends in with the background a bit. So what we're going to do first is I'm going to bring some of the blacks back in, because I feel like we're just losing some of the colour on the plane. So I'm going to roll that back just a little bit, and then we're just going to give it a touch of sharpening. But I don't tend to use the sharpen tool. I tend to use the texture tool. I just feel it gives a better finish, and just a touch of clarity, just to make it pop just a little bit more. And then, because the auto ISO has pushed this quite high up, it's quite cloudy down, that one, so we're going to just try and just take out some of the noise. Not a huge amount, just enough. I don't mind there being some noise, but I don't want it looking too noisy. And then what I am going to do is, as the background's quite noisy, I'm going to duplicate this mask, and then I'm going to do the old Tom Cruise and go inverted. And as you can see, that's selected everything but the plane. In this instance, we don't want that brush, so that's going to come out. And then what we're going to do is take out all the elements we don't need, and we're just going to smooth out that background a little bit. What I might do is just bring the exposure down just a touch. Just to make it feel more realistic. And what I might do is just knock some of the saturation and the greens, not that much, just like that. And then what we'll do is we'll just look at it globally again. I quite like that. I'll try a little bit of dehaze just to see if that does much. We don't want to do too much. There, that gives it just a little punchy feel. And there we are. And that's that one. If you compare it to where it was to start with, giving it sort of, it just feels a bit more natural, a little less flat, a little bit more punch. Do I always stay with a 3:2 ratio? No, not always. It does depend on the shot. I also use a 5:3 ratio, which is quite similar but just a bit narrower. 5:4 I will use as well, occasionally, depending on the situation. Not normally so much variation, but sometimes I use a square one. So that is our first Texan. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at C130. Now, this is from that same day. This isn't the sharpest picture that I've ever taken, or that I even took on that weekend, or that week. But what I did like about this one is I did like that we were getting hand signals from the pilot. So I decided to keep this one. I like the fact it's cropped in as well, because historically I've been guilty of sort of focusing on the wider picture and not actually the details. So I quite like this one. As I say, it's not perfectly sharp, but it's acceptably sharp. So what we're going to do, we're going to look at this one. I say we're going to go again with the lens correction. Just to double check, can you read the sliders when I'm working on them now? Because that was an issue we had some of the last streams, they were unclear. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at this one. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to see if there's any dust spots on this one. No, just that one. So what we've got here is we've got the camera's not really worked it out very well. So we've got quite a white sky, but quite a dark airplane. So we're probably going to have to try and look at these in two separate two separate ways. So potentially the easiest way is going to be to sort of drop the exposure on this a bit and then raise it on the aeroplane. So what we'll do is we'll start with the sky first. Let's see if we can select the sky and see how well it's going to do. This is the joy of the new masking tools. It's a lot easier to sort of select around it and work individually. You don't want to do it too much because sometimes you can go overkill and you'll end up with some really bad fringing, but it's brought in a lot of extra help to sort of tidy up images like this where you've got two very contrasting elements. So as you can see, I'm just adding in the areas that I want to be a bit darker. What we're going to do is we're going to bring that exposure down. It's always worth remembering when you look at the masking, always pay attention to your masking, because what you'll see here, just here, is that when I change it, there's an area of sky that wasn't selected. So you haven't picked everything. You see, it's just not. You've just got to get it right. I would recommend spending a lot more time on the masking than I am here, otherwise it will just look a bit wrong. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get something more out of this sky because there's a lot going on in the sky. There's quite a bit of cloud in there. So I'm going to try and see if I can bring some of that cloud out using either the clarity slider, which doesn't appear to be doing that much, or we'll try and bring some dehaze in. It doesn't seem to be doing a lot. It's not that pronounced. In fact, it's not working at all at the moment for some reason. Let's try again. So let's look at the dehaze. There we go. See, we've got some of that sky back. It looks a little bit more interesting. It's a little bit more going back, but I don't want to go that far with the dehaze. Some people do like to whack the dehaze all the way up, but that's not the sort of thing I'm into. So let's just try and brush a little bit of the noise out of that as well. And that's okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to focus now on the aeroplane. And it's about striking the right balance with these sliders. And what you'll find is you might find you'll go in and out of them, trying to just get the balance right so that you don't end up with lots of weird fringing and everything going on. Because nothing looks worse than when you've got something that's just oversaturated and you just got sort of fringing going everywhere. So that's something you just got to be careful of. So what we'll do is we're going to bring the details up on this first, just so that we've got a bit of detail coming in, and then we're going to try and raise the exposure just a little. Don't want to go too far on this one. That's quite nice. Now what you can see here, because I'm going in the complete opposite direction that I did to the sky, you're getting some quite awkward sort of fringing elements around the side of it. So this is where I say you've got to find the right balance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring that down just a touch, because I think we can recover it elsewhere. So we're going to just add a little bit of clarity in. And that looks fine. I'll just take a little bit of the noise. So the only downside of the Nikon D7200 sensor is it's quite a noisy sensor. So you do always have to do just a little tweak. So odd sort of fringing going on here. Doesn't look too bad. I might just do just a little bit of a tighter crop on this one. Not a huge amount, but just. Now I've done all that work on it, and you can see it's made the whole thing darker. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm now going to try and bring it all back in with the global exposure slider, and as you can see, it's giving me a much more sort of balanced look. I'm going to work on the highlights, to bring the highlights down just a touch. And one thing to also consider is your white balance. I use auto white balance on my camera, and it normally gives me a fairly good result. But this one, because it's quite a dark day, it's given me sort of a daylight setting, but I think there's probably just a little bit more sort of warmth we can give to that to take away that sort of blue tinge that we've got. So what we'll do is we'll just kind of lift that just a little bit, not too much, and it just makes the plane look a bit more grey as opposed to blue, which I think just looks a little bit better in this instance. So what do we think of that one? Do we like that one? This is also one that I think could probably work in black and white, but I've not really given it much thought. Let's see if I've got a... Yeah, see, I think this is probably something for a nice, really high contrasty black and white, I think would work. So just... Yeah, I think that looks a little bit warmer, a little bit less blue. Looks better than I thought it was going to. So it's not too bad. I think that's a keeper, that one. Quite like that one. So what we would do is let's move on to another one of the RAF regulars. On that same day we had the Hawks come through. It was a very sort of moist, cloudy day, so we got a lot of moisture around, which meant that even the Hawks were kicking up a bit of fluff. So that's this one. It's unfortunately was not as sharp as I would have liked it to have been, but it is what I class as acceptably sharp. So what we're going to do is we're going to start on that one. We're going to start off with the typical lens correction. Again, this is like the Texan earlier. This one's quite washed out a little bit, just because I think at the time it was raining, so that hasn't helped the situation. So what I'm going to start with this one is exposure wise, I think I'm okay, but I just want to add a bit of contrast back into the scene, so we'll start with that. Don't want to go too far, and then we'll start with a little bit of dehaze just to give it a little bit more of a punch. We don't want to go too far. It's not too bad. So again, I think what we're going to do with this one is we're going to focus on the airplane again, because it's the blacks are a little bit washed out. So we'll set subject, see how well it does. And that's not bad. There's a couple of little extra bits that it's picked up. As you can see, it's quite noisy when zoomed in, so it's not the sharpest one I've got, but I do like the image, and it's acceptably sharp, so we'll keep it and work with it. Perfect. So what we'll do is we'll start by bringing some of those blacks back. Not quite that much. And then we'll have a look at adding some texture into it. A little bit of clarity just to add a bit more punch. Remove a little bit of noise. Now I think what we want to do with this one is, I think again the background on this is just a little bit washed out. So what we'll try and do is we'll go Tom Cruise again. There we are. We'll remove that brush. And instead of removing, we'll add those little bits back in. Perfect. So what we'll do is we'll add a little bit of dehaze to that background as well, just to bring that in. Don't forget to reset the settings. Take out a bit of the noise. Probably even a little bit more dehaze. Not that much. And I think in contrast to the last one, I think we might in fact bring up the green saturations in this one. Not by a massive amount, just enough. Would I crop this Hawk portrait? Probably not, purely because of the streamers going in the background. But I have been known to do portrait crops. But in this instance, I think it would be... You'd have to do it in a 5x4, I think, to make it work. And it would probably work if it wasn't for the fact that it's got the streamers behind it. I feel like the streamers are part of the telling the story of how wet and how moist it was. So I always try and keep those sort of elements into it, because it's, as well as taking a picture of an aeroplane, you're trying to tell the story. So I want this picture to reflect the fact that it was absolutely chucking it down and we were soaked through. So yeah, in this case, it wouldn't be a portrait. What we'll do, I think we're there with this one. And as I say, it's not as sharp as I would like it to be, but it's still a fairly decent shot. So what we'll do is we'll move on to the Wednesday of the trip. We took a long trek up to Bulk. And yes, it was a nasty climb, but we were treated from all forms of the military on that day. Had some F-15s come through from the US Air Force and some F-35s. We had the A400, and we had some of the lesser spotted Texans. So yes, that was a crazy day. Wild Wednesday, we called it. So what we'll do is we'll start off with this one. Now this is a shot as they came through the valley towards Bulk. You could see them coming a fair distance away, and it's not one of those shots that's right in your face, but I quite like it because, like I said before, you're telling the story and it's very obvious that it's flying low level. It's very obvious it's in a valley, and it's that sort of picture which you would, if you were putting together sort of a book on the week, you'd use this just to kind of tell the story a little bit more. So what we're going to do is we'll work on this one. The only thing that I'm not particularly keen on this one is that we've got the tent down here. Now, in an ideal world, that entire tent and the entire people would have been in that, and it would have given us a really nice sort of reference factor. But as it is, it's just sort of in the way, so we'll probably end up cropping that out to start off with, just to go. Now, I could zoom all the way in, but I don't want to do that. I want to try and keep the fact that we've got the jet there, nice sharp jet. We've got the jelly behind it, and you've got the road as a point of interest, and you've obviously got this road sort of going through the valley, showing you that it is sort of a low-lying valley. So in terms of exposure, this is a fairly well exposed shot. So what I'm going to do with this one is just add a little bit of contrast in, just to kind of separate everything out a little bit, give everything a little bit more punch. And we'll have a look at the highlights just to bring those back in. We'll have a look at a little bit of dehaze just to give the background just a little bit more life. That's quite nice. I'll look at the white balance, just bring that up a little bit, because it wasn't quite that green. It was a little bit yellowy as well, so just to lift that up just a little bit. And this will be a fairly simple edit, this one. It's one of those quick ones that's just sort of, it should pick the plane out quite nicely. As you can see, it's missed a couple of spots, but we can zoom in. Just fix that. One thing to remember when you have the mask is click this auto mask. So what it does is it does a very good job of keeping within the lines. So it just sort of, you can run up against, you see it just clicked over there. But if it's there's definitive contrast, it won't overspread. So that's okay. We're not going to do too much, just a little bit of texture. Or maybe we'll lift it just a little bit, just a little bit of extra exposure, just to give it a little bit more pop. And what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to see if I can do something with this in the background, and see if we can just give that a bit more. This might work, it might not. So we'll just sort of, so it's just added just a little bit of a extra just give a little bit of punch to that jelly. And as you can see by doing that, it's blurred out the background again a bit more, just to show that it is there. And that is a nice, quick, simple edit. Now this is one that I would potentially change a crop on. I've obviously gone with 3x2 here, but one of my favourite crops that I use quite a lot, which is not saved in here because I managed to break Lightroom last night. It's 5x3, so it still covers a lot of space, but it just widens it out just a little bit, and that's sometimes quite good. And of course, for something like this, if you were that way inclined, 16x9 crop would probably work on here as well. But again, because I want to tell the story of the valley, it's actually not that bad. I thought it was going to look worse than it does. So but I'm going to tick it back we'll go with the 5x3 for now, and we'll just leave it there. 5x3 is one I also upload to Instagram with, and that's quite nice. We also got visited by the boss bird, the Lakenheath boss bird. And there we are. This turned out to be one of my favourite shots for the week. It's possibly one of the sharpest shots I've ever taken. I used the line, it's so sharp I nearly cut myself. When you zoom all the way in on the camera, you can read I don't know what it's like on a big screen like this, but you can even get that far in and still read everything on the insignia, so that's a pretty sharp shot. So what I'm going to do with this one, I'm going to do the lens correction. Now this one I'm probably not going to crop. I don't feel like it's going to benefit from any cropping. If anything, I might potentially crop it for 6:9 if I was to use it as a banner on something, but as an image I like the way it's cropped. It's filled the scene. It's very obviously landlocked. So what we're going to do is we're going to sort of look at this. I think exposure wise I think we're okay. I think the only thing is obviously there's some sort of highlights that could probably do a correcting just here, just because they're quite bright. So we'll start there first. As you can do, let's see, that brings it back down. With this one we can go all the way down, I think, but probably maybe not all the way. That's a bit much. So we'll go to around -70. That's done a fairly good job of that. So also think we just want to add a little bit of contrast in, just to bring a bit of life and punch to it. I think what we'll do is we'll focus on the airplane. As you can see there, it's done a relatively good masking. So we'll push the texture up just a bit. I mean, I might go quite bold with this one, because it is quite in your face. It's quite separated from the background. So what we might do is we'll whack some clarity in as well, give it like a proper bit of oomph, so to speak. But obviously by doing that we've introduced a bit of noise, so we'll just roll that off just a touch. And there we are. That has brought that right out. And what we'll do is we'll go back. I mean, I could probably lift the shadows ever so slightly on this. Not a huge amount, but just a touch, just to make the bottom bits just a little bit clearer. And that, I think, is pretty much done. Maybe we'll add a bit of dehazing, just see what the dehaze does. Makes it looks a bit naff, I think. So we'll remove that. What I might do is just add a little bit into the white balance, just to give it a little, just to give the grass behind it a little bit of life. It's been fairly dry up to that point, so the grass wasn't your perfect green. It was a little bit, a little bit burnt out. And that, I think, we might need to add, as we've done all the work to it, we've just dropped the exposure a bit. So what we'll do is just add a little bit more back in. And there we go. And you can see where we've come from, where we've ended up. It's a relatively sympathetic edit. We've just really added a bit more punch into it. And obviously, because of where we were located, we've got some very good close top sides. This turned out another one to be one of my favourite shots of the week. You've got the plain top side blurring out the background, you've got the jelly there, and you've still got some streamers as they've come through. Again, this is another one which is probably not going to deviate too much from the initial sort of look. So what we'll do is we'll start with this one. I think we'll add a little bit of contrast in, just to, probably not too heavy, but I don't want to go too light on this one because I quite like, I want this one to be quite contrasty to kind of punch out a little bit. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in, do most of the editing in this one on the actual plane itself, because I don't think there's much to do to the background. So we'll, as you can see, when you've got a really contrasty image, you've got the grey against the green, that mask does pick it up really well. So what we'll do is we'll go quite heavy on this. We'll go bit of texture. And then we'll whack some clarity in. That's probably too much. That feels a bit kind of garish. Just roll it back just a touch. One trick to always think of is when you roll up to something, if your eye immediately tells you, oh, 75 looks good, realistically, when you take a step back, you'll probably find you'll want to roll back. Sometimes less is more. So what we'll do is we're just going to add a little bit of, reduce a little bit of the noise. Again, I think that's quite nice. What I'll probably do is just crop in a little bit more, just to balance it out a little bit. What I might do is just bring the highlights down a touch. What I might do is I might do that on the plane, because I don't think there's not many highlights to recover from the grass. So just to bring those overly blown out areas back, and jobs are good. What I might do is might just raise the temperature again on this one just a little bit, just to kind of make it look a little bit less blue, a little bit more grey. And there we are. That's another one. Again, this is a fairly light edit. You could do some really, really heavy edits on these, but I'm not one for heavy editing. Sometimes you can over edit and it'll ruin a picture. The worst thing I find is if you can take a good picture and then just edit it within an inch of its life, and it just doesn't do it for me. But art is subjective. It does look a little bit blue, but not completely blue. What I might do is let's have a look at the plane, see if I can raise the temperature of the plane just a little bit, just to get a little bit more of that blue out. There we go. That's better. Yeah, sometimes it's the blue nature of the plane. Sometimes it's the reflection of the sky, the light, the camera. Is what it is sometimes, but sometimes all you got to do is you got to just find the right balance for yourself. So what I will do is I'm going to show you another couple of shots that we've got that prove the point. Don't always delete all of your pictures. I used to be really bad for taking a look at a picture and going, oh, I've cut the wing off, I've cut the tail off, and all that sort of thing, just throwing it away. So I've ended up with a shot like this one, for example. Now, normally I would have chucked it away because I've cut the tail off, I'd be kicking myself. But I feel like with this one, it's still quite a sharp shot and it's still usable for some things. So what this immediately says to me that I want to crop in around here. Yeah, I think you're right, Anthony. I think it's the blues can sort of be, should we say, boosted by the colours behind it. So whilst they're not actually blue, they can look more blue with the reflections of the sky and obviously the contrast behind it. So what we'll do with this one is I think we're going to be able to crop this in because it's quite a sharp shot. So we should be able to crop right in. We could probably crop in even more. But what I want to do is I want to keep the US Air Force badge. Might go back out just a touch. So obviously we can see here we've taken an image that normally would have been a throwaway in a bin, and we've found an alternative use for it. So the exposure is a little bit high on this one, and the highlights are a bit blown out. So what we're going to do is we're going to roll the exposure back, so it's a bit more central. Going to add a little bit of contrast in. We're going to roll the highlights down. Evening, Alex, are you well? So what we're going to do this one I'm probably not going to go in and look at the plane separately, because what I want to do is I want to bring a bit of the background out as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to apply the texture and the clarity on top and see how that comes out. So what we'll do is we'll just pump the texture in. We'll go for a bit of clarity on the body on this one. I mean, this is, yeah, that's probably too much. But we'll do somewhere around there, feels about right. And what we'll do is we'll globally just adjust the luminance to take away some of that noise. Probably don't need to actually go that far. And there we are, we've got a shot there, which initially I was going to throw away, but I thought, well, you know what I'll do is I'll focus on the cockpit and use that as another image. I mean, this is another one that you could potentially, if you so wish, this one you could make a sort of 1x1 and sort of really focus in on the cockpit. I like it where we are. And what the other thing I could have done is I could have potentially gone into Photoshop and changed this so that the colour matched. Some people might like to do that, but it's you know, is what it is. Planes need repairing. Sometimes you can't get the right colours, so we've gone with that one. One of the only frustrations I did have when we was up there is because there were so many of us, we had a habit of getting in each other's ways, and as is typical, your sharpest shot is always the one that's got somebody else's head in it. So this historically would have been a shot I consigned to the bin, because it's sharp, it's nice, but there's someone's head in the way. But what I did, you know what I thought? I can work with this. It would be ridiculous to throw a sharp picture like this. So I think what we can probably do is crop this right in and focus on the front of the aircraft. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to crop it right in. We're going to... No, Lightroom side, it doesn't want to do what I want to do. So we're going to crop right in. We're going to lose the head. And what we're going to do is we're going to use just enough so that we can keep the props in. And there we are. So we've got cropped in, we've cropped out the head, and we've still got a shot that works in its own right. Now this is one of the never-ending arguments that you'll get with aviation photographers, is how blurred should your props be. Now some people will say it needs to be a full disc. I don't particularly like a full disc. I like to see the props, the shape of the props on the plane. So I like to have a good amount of blur to show that the plane is moving, but I like to have just enough freeze in it so that I can see what it's going to be. So what I'm going to do with this one I'm going to be quite aggressive on. I think I'm feeling in a sort of quite high contrasty mood. So what we're going to do is we're just going to drop the exposure just a little bit. We're going to pump some contrast up, not too much because I don't want to. We're going to look at the highlights, because obviously we've got some sort of highlights around the top here and along here, so we're going to roll that down just a little bit. And then we're going to select the plane in this instance. like I said before, we're going to take out the props, so I don't want to do too much to those. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pump the clarity. We're going to pump up the texture on this one, just to make all the doors and all the gaps and all the panels just pop a little bit. And then we're just going to add just a touch of noise reduction. And I think what we'll do is we'll just remove some of the shadows, not too many, but just enough. And then we'll pop out of that. Now that's come out quite nicely. So what I might do is I'm just gonna play around with the crop just a little bit, just to bring a little bit more back in. I don't want to go. What I don't want to do is get the offender's head in. But I think there we are. I think that is a nice shot. It's kept the drama of the scene. It's kept you've got the full scale of the airplane. It's nice in your face. Unfortunately, obviously we've cut the tail out, but you know, sometimes with planes this big, what I like to do is I like to cut in just to give the idea that these planes are big and can't fill your frame. So it's just a nice little one like that. And what I think we'll do now is we'll have another look at some. We'll have a look at some of the battle penguins that came through on that day, the F-35s. So they came through low and fast. It's really nice to see the F-35s out in the wild. So this is a fairly decently balanced shot. It's relatively sharp. It's not one of the sharpest ones. However, there's a lot we can work with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to correct the lens profile, and we're just going to look around, see if there's any dust spots. There are just a couple. Dust spots are the bane of my existence. So what we're going to do with this one is we're going to give it a relatively tight crop, I think. Not completely tightly, but we'll go in here. This is actually the picture that I posted on my Instagram today. So RS7 Aviation. And just say if there's anyone who aren't subscribed to the YouTube channel, give us a subscribe, and you might get a special notification that pops up. And also, as I said before, if we can get up to 100 subscribers within a few days, I'll be able to make it into a proper YouTube channel and not just youtube.com/bunch of numbers. We'll actually be able to call it AvGeeks Live, so everybody will be able to find it. So what we're going to do here is we're going to raise exposure just a little bit. Just to give the plane a bit more life. But I think what we're probably going to have to do is we're probably going to have to treat the sky separately on this one. We'll have to look at them both in isolation, unless we can get it back with dehaze. So we can get it back with dehaze, but I don't like to use dehaze on everything. I don't want the dehaze to affect the airplane in this instant, because it's not like we're in fog or anything. So we're going to try and select the sky, see how well that comes out. Not too bad. It's brought in some of the airplanes, so we'll get that out of there. Lovely. And what we'll do is we'll add the dehaze to the sky, just to bring a bit more life back to it. And then we'll look at the cloudy. Hey! I think with this one, it's quite a grainy sky, so we'll just kind of smooth that out. The good thing with the sky is you can just completely wipe out the noise. So what we're going to do then is we're going to focus on the aeroplane. And we're going to go with the texture just to give it a bit more punch. There's a lot of shapes and zigzags on the body, so we're probably going to pump the clarity up just a bit so we can try and bring those out. We've brought the noise up, so we'll take that down. Raise the exposure just a touch. Now what we've done in this, in the process of doing this, we've reduced the exposure on the overall scene. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring it up just a little bit. I think what we might do is just bring the shadows. See, now you found it, everyone's going to be subscribing. I was going to put some Top Gun alerts on, but I didn't get around to it. So there we are. We've put a little bit of just the extra shadows in, just to give it a bit more. Look at the white balance just a touch. Don't think it's going to achieve much because these are it's quite grey anyway. If anything, it's just to warm the scene just a touch. There we are. And there you can see the difference between the two. Again, it's a relatively sympathetic edit, because when you've got the shot right, you don't need to do too much to it. I mean, I could go to and just hammer it with various different presets and all sorts of things, but it just wouldn't work. Wouldn't be right for me. So yeah, that's that one. Now what we'll do is we'll look at another F-35. This one I'm going to do a little bit more work to because I like the shot. I don't like where it's located in the scene. There's quite a lot going on in this scene. There's some nice cloud formations going on. And unfortunately, it's not centering the frame. And if I decide to go and sort of crop in all the way, I lose all those lovely foundations. And whilst it's a nice picture of the F-35, it just now looks like it's against a grey, boring sky. So what we're going to do is this is one where I'm going to add a little bit more to the sky so that we can keep as much drama in as we possibly can. Yes, and you are bang on. It is effectively a raw file. It's not actually a picture. It's just a bundle of data which your camera captures. So when you bring it into Lightroom, it's the process of making the changes that it's effectively, the way I look at it is it's like developing film. A raw file is your roll of film. You bring it into Lightroom, which is your darkroom, and you get your final image out of it. So if anyone ever tells you that using Lightroom and Photoshop is cheating, call them an idiot. So as I say, what we're going to do is we're going to take this into Photoshop. And what we're going to do again, we're just going to add to the bottom of this one. Now, what this should do, this should come quite nicely. It'll find all these different cloud formations and everything and add just a little bit more back to the bottom. So what we'll do is we'll go in there again. We'll add a few inches. And then we'll look at sometimes what you can do is you can do the auto select tool depending on what sky you've got, but sometimes what I like to do is I like to select this just to take a little bit of the extra sky, because then what that will do is that will replace that bit of sky, and I find that sometimes it just blends in a little bit more. So we're going to go to the content aware fill, and as you can see in the preview, it's kind of added a little bit more extra using the cloud formations. You'll probably zoom in there and have a look at it, and it still looks relatively natural. So what we'll do is we'll look at that. And I think that's done a pretty good job of creating a new bit of sky. So what we can do now is we can create a crop, and we can just work a little bit more of that sky back in. We'll fix the image size. That's done that already. Excellent stuff. And then we will send it back to Lightroom. Now again, this is one of those I could crop in, but I don't want to crop too much because I really like the clouds around it. And whilst we are focusing on the plane, this is another one that can tell a story. I mean, you could crop in, and still, now that we've added a bit more sky, you could crop in and you've kept what's going on around you. But in this instance, I'm going to leave a lot more sky in the shot just to see what we can play with, see what we can do, because in my mind I'm going to try and make these a lot more contrasty, a lot more clarity, a lot more dehaze in it. So what we're going to do is we're going to select the sky, focus on the sky on its own. We'll come back to the airplane a little bit. Remove the airplane from this. And this is one where I'm going to allow myself to be a little bit artistic and try and make that sky really kind of pop. There we go. Add some clarity in there. Take out all that noise we've created. Probably not all that. We'll probably add a little bit back in just to make it look a little bit more real. That's quite nice. And we'll look at the highlights in the sky just to see what we can do. Won't go too far. And what we'll do is we'll look at the aeroplane in itself. Give that a bit of love. There we go. Raise the shadows just a touch. Now, as you can see, right here is where there's been a bit of a fault with the mask. Now, this is one of the things to always look out for, because these are the sort of things that will make your pictures just look a bit off when you end up with halos or bits missing. So what I'm doing is I'm going to go back in, going to add that back. Blend that back in with the rest of the sky. what you'll see here is we're going to have to brush out to further parts in the sky, because this is obviously, it's created like a gradient effect. So we've got to try and bring that. There we go. The problem with Lightroom is it doesn't let you zoom in when you're actually doing something. Wonderful. And there we go. Now what we have done is we've made it a little bit too dark. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise the exposure for the global image. And then add just a touch more contrast. And this is quite blue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise the whites just a little bit. And there we are. I still think the plane could probably use just a little bit more of a lift in the shadow department. Not a huge one, and we'll raise the blacks ever so slightly as well, just to, there we go. Remove a little bit of the noise. And bish bash bosh. We'll take one final look for dust spots. Nope. More lovely. And there we are. And this is one of those ones, I mean, yeah, this is personal preference. I mean, I could zoom in on it a lot more and it still look cool, but for me, part of the reason this picture is good is the sky. So I'm very keen to keep the cloud formations in as best I can, even if it's just not cropped in on the airplane. But I mean, I'll do different crops for different things. So even if I put this on Instagram, I might crop in a little bit further. But you know, it's personal preference. I think one thing that I always found with myself is I always questioned myself whether I had a style, because obviously a lot of people on Instagram, they have their style. I've just decided that I'll edit a picture how I see that picture as needing editing, and sometimes it will be an over the top, really sort of contrasty one. Sometimes it will just be like a more realistic image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do one more for you, and this is a shot. This is one of the first shots that I've actually sent off to a pilot. So this is a picture of a Texan. This was through Spur on our final day. If you do climb Spur, there is a bog halfway up. Don't end up to your knees in it. That's my one piece of advice. But let's have a look at this one. Now, we're going to start with, again, the lens profile, and then we're going to crop in on it and get a nice crop. Now, what I've done with this one is I've aimed to keep in the blur in the background, and we've got a bit of space for us to fly into. So what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to be quite tight, be quite hard on the detailing, because I want to bring out the punchiness of the plane, and I want to keep in where you can see the exhaust fumes coming out through the side, because I think that really makes this shot. So I think we're okay for the exposure. We'll raise it just a touch, and then we're going to have a look at the contrast. Have a look at the highlights. The highlights probably don't need to come down too far. And then we're going to go in and focus on the aeroplane. It's done quite a good job of that. It's just happens to be one of my favourite shots of a Texan that I've taken, and I've only taken a few shots of Texans, so it's rare that I've got a good one. So we're going to pump the texture up. We're going to pump the clarity up. And then what we're going to do is we're going to roll the blacks back down, because it looks a bit blue at the minute. And work out a little bit of the noise. That's quite nice. And then what we're going to do, we're going to pop back, and we're going to want to raise the temperature up a little bit, because as you can sort of see in the image that there's a lot of areas where it's green, a lot of areas where it's sort of like a lighter, paler green. Now it's a bit more the sort of browns and yellows. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and raise the temperature just a little bit, just to bring that back in. I think we'll probably raise the exposure just a little bit now we've played around with that. Give it a little bit of dehaze, just to add a little bit of additional contrast in. And we are going to just adjust that crop just a little bit more. There we are, it's a nice looking shot. If you compare it to where we've come from, we've taken a relatively flat image, and then we've just added a little bit more life into it. Well, it's left us with this. So, do you know what? I'll tell you what, I'll do one more picture, but I'll leave it up to you guys to decide what you want. Do you want to see another F-35, another F-15, or another A400? What do we want? Everybody in with the F-15s. Right, we'll go for an F-15 now. Which one have we got? We'll go with this one. This one I quite like. It's as he's coming past us. You've got this is another one which tells a story. You've got the two contrasting bits of land here. It's very clear that you want to mount him because you've got the angle. And you've got all the tree forests. Oh, yeah. And it's very obviously landlocked, and you've got that blur in it, so it looks like it's coming through relatively quickly. So we'll have a go at this one. Bouchons are a puller, especially if they're going round in circles. If you ever see a Bouchon going round in circles, take a video of it and stick it on your Instagram, and it'll fly. So what I'm going to do with this one, the exposure's all right, I think. So we're just going to add a bit of contrast, just to add a little bit of life to the background. And we're going to roll some highlights off. This might benefit from a little bit of dehaze, just to bring, there we are, just to bring that background out a little bit. I think we might make the crop just a little bit tighter. There we are. Lovely. And we'll add some texture to that. Some clarity to it as well. Not that much. Take the noise out just a little bit. Don't think I've got any pictures of Sir M. Bright the Sixth, unfortunately. I had other things to look at. So yeah, that's this is another one of those really simple edits. I might just raise the exposure on the plane just a touch. We'll take the highlights down a bit because there's quite a few highlights on the wings that are overblown a little bit. And there we are. I'm tempted to. It is good. It's very clever that it does that. I mean, it's not perfect. I'm sure as it goes along, the AI will improve. But yeah, it's getting there. It's a definite improvement, and I find it really useful, especially when you've got to treat the sky. I mean, I use it mostly for the airplanes. I don't tend to use it in my landscape shots and stuff like that. It's mainly just purely for the airplanes because you've got two separate entities a lot of the time. One thing I do want to do on this one, I want to put the focus on the airplane a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create like a false vignette, but not a vignette. I like to use the radial gradient filter. And what I'll do is I'll spread that out and get it there, and then we'll Tom Cruise it. And what I'll do is bring the exposure of the background down just a touch. And then we will adjust this. Find the right point for it. We want the front of the airplane to that's quite nice. I like that. And what we'll do is we'll just add a bit of noise reduction to the edge. I might even bring the exposure down a little bit more. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I like that. What do we think? What do we think of that? Do we think the radial filter? Does it look? Does it add to the picture, or does it look really weird? I think it looks nice. There we are. We've gone from a relatively flat picture, a little bit of work. And this one looks a little bit like something Ant Fogarty would post. The Ant Fogarty, the legend. Maybe it's a bit extreme. That's kind of. That's a bit better. I mean, we could add a normal vignette. But I don't like the normal vignettes because they always look a bit kind of like, ooh, just so predictable. So that's why I use a radial filter to bring stuff in. Yeah, so that, I like that. The legend. Legend indeed. Has anyone asked him if their A10s have arrived yet? Yeah, so there we are. This is a sort of a whistle stop tour through some of the shots I took at the Mach Loop the other week. Obviously, all editing is subjective, and what I've done you guys might not like. What I might do is I'll post these pictures in the Facebook group afterwards, so that everybody can have a comment and start a chit chat around the things. One thing I will say is don't ever be afraid to look at sort of presets. I've got a massive batch of presets. Not that I use them so much, but purely because sometimes I feel like I don't have. I'll have a picture, but I won't have a vision for it. So what I'll try and do is I'll like whack some sort of presets over them. So I've got a sort of like I've got a preset set up, which is what I just sort of what I would normally do, just to whack onto an aeroplane, just to kind of give it a bit of life, and then sometimes I go from there, or sometimes you've got sort of stuff like this, which is the Amp Fogarty preset collection. Obviously, these have been developed from his time at the Mach Loop. So if you do go to the Mach Loop and you're looking for ideas on how to edit your pictures, certainly give these a look. They are a very good set of presets, and they give you. If you don't know what you want to do with your picture, just scrolling through it will give you ideas. But interesting, this is one of my. This is a shot that I quite like from the week. It's the reason I like it is because when these F-15s came through, they decided to come and pull out really early, but they came in high, pulled out early. But for some reason, this one, by the time I've caught it just coming out the valley, so it's very obvious coming out the valley. It's got the streamers going, you've got the jelly, and you've got this join here where it leaves the valley, is going into it, and you've got that really pronounced sort of burner exhaust. So yeah, this is another sort of nice one that I got from it. But yeah, I will post the ones that I have edited up for everyone to have a look at. I'll do that in a minute. And yeah, hopefully now that we've got YouTube, this should automatically save down to YouTube as a video. So if you want to go back and watch it again, you can do. That should be available in 1080p. Hopefully it's been informative for you. Hopefully you've been able to read everything that's on the screen. I'm hoping to do a few more of these over the coming months. Now that the air show season's coming back, I've got a couple of shows at Shuttleworth, and obviously there's RIAT in July. So I'm sure over the course of the next couple of months you'll see more of these, either from myself or from other members. But for now, I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you had a great time. Like and subscribe on the YouTube channel. Hit the notification bell so that when we go live, you'll be notified of it. But yeah, ciao for now.